So let's take a look at St. Thomas Aquinas and these excerpts from his huge work, the Summa Theologica. I've begun to decided to throw in these images when I can. You'll see the one from David of the death scene of Socrates and the Phaedo, the School of Athens by Raphael depicting great philosophers, especially Plato and Aristotle. And I do think that that one actually can help, can be a support in trying to get a hold of their respective metaphysical ideas. This one I'm throwing in, maybe we can make something of it. It's called St. Thomas Aquinas, The Triumph Over the Heretics. And it at least gives you a sense of the esteem in which Thomas was held. He really is the central theologian of the Catholic Church, and in a way the most important Christian thinker ever, I think, in my opinion. So this is some very small little excerpts from his larger work, and they deal with really three questions. There are three articles, but they can be thought of as three questions. They ask three questions. The first is whether the existence of God is self-evident, and that's what I'll talk about in this little talk. The second, whether the existence of God can be demonstrated. And thirdly, whether God exists. His method is dialectical. Imagine that he's trying to set up a kind of a debate, and dialectical in the sense that he wants to get different sides in the air and then try to resolve the dispute. He starts with objections. He asks the question whether the existence of God is self-evident, for instance, and then you see a series of objections. Here we have three. Those are actually arguments against the position which he himself will take. He starts with the objections to his own position. And the turning point in each article is the on the contrary, where he will state his position, and usually he will quote some authority. That authority can be the Bible, it can be another theologian who's canonical or accepted as being orthodox, or it can be an ancient philosopher, oftentimes Aristotle, and he is referred to here as the philosopher, which is how Thomas Aquinas refers to Aristotle, which I suppose is a mark of how much he respects Aristotle, simply to call him the philosopher. So this question, whether the existence of God is self-evident, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we understand what he means by self-evident. What does it mean for a truth or a statement to be self-evident? If you are American, and there's no reason you should be, but if you are, like me, the most familiar use of that concept of self-evidence is in the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, etc., etc. And the idea there, and in general the idea of self-evidence, is there are some truths which are so basic and so fundamental and so, in a way, built into the structure either of our thinking or of the world around us, that their truth does not need support. They don't need evidence. They don't need to be proved. They are self-evident in the sense that once one understands what is being said, for instance, that all men are created equal, one also understands, without proof, that the statement is true. That to grasp the meaning of the statement is also to grasp its truth, or to understand that it is true. And what Thomas is asking here is, let's take the statement, God exists. Is that self-evident? Well, if it's not self-evident, then it's contrary. God does not exist, must somehow or another not make any sense, or be immediately grasped as being false. You'll see that he is thinking of Anselm's argument in objection 2. Again, this is a position that he is not taking. There is some reference to Anselm's argument, and he at least interprets Anselm's argument as saying that the existence of God is a self-evident truth. He does not believe that that God's existence is self-evident, but with qualification. Let's look at the third section, really, of any article from the Summa Theologica, the I answer that, in which Thomas really lays out his own reasoning, his own support for his position, his best argument. He says this: I answer that a thing can be self-evident in either of two ways. On the one hand, self-evident in itself, though not to us, on the other, self-evident in itself and to us. He is borrowing from Aristotle, I believe, here, even more explicitly later on, where Aristotle somewhere says some things are knowable in themselves, are most knowable, but not necessarily knowable to us. We have to start with what is familiar to us and what we can grasp and move on from there. And sometimes Aristotle says we will get to truths which are more knowable, more certain in themselves, but not necessarily so obvious or certain to us when we first encounter them. Every self-evident truth is self-evident in itself, Thomas says, but not all of them are self-evident to us. He continues, a proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the essence of the subject, as man is an animal, for animal is contained in the essence of man. So, for Thomas, self-evidence is when the thing that's being said about something, the predicate, is actually contained in the essence of the subject. So to say that man is an animal is simply to articulate and to bring out and make explicit what is already contained in the very idea man, that is embedded, one might say, in the idea of man or human being, is the idea of animal, or that a human being is a sort of animal creature. And that would be self-evident because the predicate, animal, is included in the subject, man or human being. If therefore, he continues, the essence of the predicate and the subject be known to all, that is, if we understand the essence of the concepts that we are using, for instance, human being, man, and animal, the proposition will be self-evident to all, as is clear with regard to the first principles of demonstration, the principles of logic and proof, the terms of which are common things that no one is ignorant of, such as being and non-being, whole and part, and such like. That is, if the self-evident truths that are being proposed make do with concepts with which we are all familiar, then their self-evidence will be obvious to us, or they will be self-evident to us. And he's thinking, for instance, here of one of the starting points of Euclid's geometry, the ancient book of geometry. The first principles that Euclid starts with are things, because of the first things, they can't be proved in the sense they can't rely on anything that's been proved earlier. They have to be self-evident. Sorry, just checking the time. So, for instance, the whole is greater than the part is a self-evident truth in the sense that once we understand the terms whole and part, and this is actually from Euclid, we understand that the whole must be greater than the part. Now, the problem with saying that the statement God exists is self-evident is that we do not understand, we do not grasp fully the essence of the subject. Thomas says that, he says at the bottom of the page, therefore I say that this proposition, God exists, of itself is self-evident, for the predicate is the same as the subject, because God is his own existence, but we do not know the essence of God, so the proposition is not self-evident to us. So even though God's existence is, Thomas claims, contained in his essence, so that he is a necessary being and must exist, so the proposition God exists is self-evident in itself. It's not self-evident to us. It's not immediately clear and evident to us because we do not grasp the essence of God. So the existence of God, at least for creatures like us, does need to be proved. It's not immediately grasped by reason, maybe by faith, but not by reason as a truth. And he tells us how he'll do this, how he will prove the existence of God by his effects. And we'll see in the third little talk on Thomas what that means.